God, did you not see what she did to me? God, I didn't do anything. It wasn't fair. I heard the Lord say again, I want you to write her name on the wall. I'm arguing with the Lord, and I felt him ask me, why were you willing to forgive your husband? And why were you willing to forgive him and not her? And I said, because I love him.
Oh,
And I felt the Lord say, and I love her. If the walls of the church could talk, they would tell the story of two women that Jesus loved equally, me and her.
welcome to Living the Grace Life. I'm your host, Jennifer Sakata, and you've made your way to the corner of real grace for your real life. Sometimes grace is hard to come by, like when someone's trash talked your kid or stolen your project idea. And other times, grace is downright impossible, as was the case for my guest today. So I want you to take a moment right now and think about the worst thing you don't think you could survive. I know, not exactly the question you expected to hear on a Tuesday morning drive or a Wednesday date with the pile of laundry, but I promise there's healing and hope in the asking. So, what would it be for you? Betrayal would rank pretty high for me, but I don't know what kind of healing would have to take place if betrayal were also mixed with an assault on someone I love. Listen to these words my guest, Kimberly Haar, wrote before our conversation. I want your listeners to know that healing is possible, even after the worst thing you never thought you'd survive. I've walked through trauma, but by God's grace, I've also walked into restoration, purpose, and joy. Kimberly Haar is a licensed therapist, author, and speaker with nearly 2 decades of experience in trauma recovery and marriage and family therapy. Blending clinical insight with deep faith, she helps others move from pain to purpose. Kim draws from her own story of healing, sharing a message of hope and restoration. She lives out the reminder that with God, no story is too shattered to be rewritten, and no life too broken to be beautifully restored. Please help me welcome my new friend, Kimberly Haar. Kimberly, welcome to Living the Grace Life.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm honored to be here.
Oh, it's good to have you. And we found out in the proverbial green room, you and I were at the Daughter's First Retreat at Glenairy Castle this past March.
We were, and it was absolutely beautiful.
Oh, I hope your soul was rested by the end of it as much as mine.
Absolutely. It was so nice being with another group of women that we could just focus on getting refilled, and it was an amazing experience.
I'm glad to hear that. Well, we're going to do it again next March 23 through 25. So we'll just shout that out there, listeners. I'll be telling you more about that as we get a little bit closer, but we hope we might get to see you again. Kimberly, why don't you introduce us a little bit to yourself and who we might find around your table and who motivates you to live the grace life these days?
Yes, who my people are, who's around me. Monday through Thursday, I'm actually a licensed therapist, so my clients are around me on those days. But
Mm,
in my personal life, I am surrounded by an amazing husband who God
mm.
has so blessed me with. And we are in a blended family. So between the two of us, we have our 7 biological children, and then many of them are married. And so I think we've got 11 adult children between the ages of 27 and 35. And
My.
then we've got 3 grandbabies. And then you throw in my parents who live like a mile down the road. It is never quiet at the Haar household.
Oh my gosh. I love that. That is just beautiful.
No, I shouldn't forget, and our rescue dog. Because when
Oh,
Andrew and I married, we got a rescue dog, And all I can say is I should have known, it should have been my first sign when the foster family left a bottle of Xanax on the counter with her name on it. So she's got some separation anxiety issues, but she rounds out the Haar clan.
Oh my gosh, that's really fun. Grace is for the big stuff, as we often think, but the reality is we need grace in the small, ordinary, funny things as well. So, what is something maybe small, funny, ordinary that you do every day where you are needing an extra dose of grace? For me, it's remembering the big three, as my husband calls them, my keys, which are in my purse. So that's a twofer, my water bottle, and my phone. And on any given day, I'm running back in the house. Wait, I got to go grab my whatever. Where do you
You
need
kn
grace every day?
I think I'm a little bit the same. I can get a little absent-minded in the morning as I'm running out of the house, and
Mhm.
as you said that, it reminded me of it wasn't that long actually, it was April Fool's Day, and
Oh,
I was
funny.
in my car, and I was in a hurry, and I didn't open the garage door. And so my
Oh,
husband was leaving in
no.
his truck at the same time, and I start to back out, and my taillights go on, and I realized at the last minute that my garage door was closed because I was in a hurry.
Oh.
And so he's yelling and screaming for me to open the door, and so I just rolled down my window and I smiled at him, and I went, "April Fool's Day." And I pretended that I did it on purpose, but I need grace in just I can sometimes just go on autopilot, and it's those
Oh.
small things I can forget.
Oh my gosh, that is perfect. You were definitely a step ahead of me because I did something very similar, only I didn't stop before the door opened. So
Oh,
we ended
no.
up with having to replace the windshield and a few other little tidbits. But oh my goodness, that's a good one. We
Mm,
need grace, real grace for our real lives, right?
that's right. I think we have to take ourselves with a grain of salt.
That is true. I do often say this that grace grows in the giggles too. So you can either giggle or scream, one or the other. So you get to choose.
That's right. I'd
I
rather
think I
giggle.
would too. But I know for you, Kimberly, that grace has dug a lot deeper
Mm.
than getting in your car and nearly forgetting that the garage door was down. You've written healing from life's deepest hurts. And as you described it, it's part testimony, part therapy, which I could not agree more. But let's jump in. Take us there to 4 years after your divorce and the
Mhm.
trauma that unfolded shortly after. And maybe take us back if you need to lay out the story for us.
I'd love to. In 2013, I made the hardest decision I've ever made in my life,
Mm.
and that was to divorce my first husband. We had been married for 23 years, and I fully intended it was going to be till death do us part. And during that 23 years, my ex husband had a pattern of the infidelity, pornography, and but we had 4 young children, and I made the decision to stay in my marriage because I didn't want my kids to go from home to home. I didn't want our family to be apart, and so I made the decision to forgive, and we would have good years in between, so it was not just like every month there was something. There were good years in between. I like to say there was no domestic violence in our home. In 2013, I discovered my ex-husband had actually he was at the time involved in an affair. And
Mm.
when I discovered that, I knew that I could no longer stay in my marriage. And so I made the decision to file for divorce. And because our youngest children were 15 at the time, I decided that for 4 years, I was just going to focus on being a single mom, get them raised, get them off to college. And I knew I had work to do in healing from just the trauma of divorce that I'd gone through, the things in my marriage. And so 4 years came and went. And I
Mm.
woke up in 2017 and something stirred inside me and it just said, "This is the year you're going to be married again." And I swear I heard the words
Love
buckle your
that.
seatbelt.
So,
I just thought it just means it's going to go fast and that's wonderful.
mm,
But then I thought, where does a 50-year-old woman go to meet men? Because I had
mm.
dated one man in 26 years, 27 years. And I laughed because I was raised at a fishing camp in Ontario, Canada during the summers. And I learned a lot about fishing. And one of the things I learned is when you have one line in the water, you have a chance at catching one fish. I learned if you have five lines in
Nice.
the water, you have a better chance at catching a fish. So I got brave at the age of 50 and I joined 5 dating sites, online
Oh
dating
my
sites.
god. That is brave.
13 first dates. And I
Mm,
decided, okay, you know what? This just isn't for me.
mm,
And I decided I was going to have one last first date before I closed all my accounts. And I met a
mm,
man by the name of Andrew. He was an engineer. And I actually met him on April Fool's Day. And so when we met, we just hit it off. And I knew this is the man I wanted to marry.
mm,
And Andrew knew that as well. And being an engineer, neither one of us wanting to jump into something, we were both probably, he was more logical than me. I tease him now because I think we had dated a week and a half. And he told me, he said, I asked Google how long I have to know somebody before I know I'm in love. And he told me, he said, I want to marry you. So it
mm,
was not a question. So I didn't answer. I didn't want to make a fool of myself, but we both knew that this was it. And so we saw each other almost every day for a month.
mm,
Everything was just beautiful. And towards the end of that first 4 weeks, I got a phone call from my ex husband, and he asked me if I would come by his apartment and talk to him about our adult children. That was not uncommon. We had often talked about our adult children. I went there one day after work and the conversation changed, and he began asking me about us dating again and me giving him
mm,
another opportunity. And I did not see the changes that I needed to see to even consider that. So I told him, I said, I've moved forward and I'm dating somebody seriously. And I said, you need to move forward too. I'm sorry,
mm.
but it is over. And when I said that, he looked at me and he said, maybe I'm just going to have to go talk to that man. And
Oh
I thought,
gosh.
what does that mean?
Mm,
Because I had never talked to him about him. He didn't know his name, didn't know where he lived, as far as I knew. I left. But when I left, I called Andrew and I said, can I come by your house for just a little bit? I wanted to give him a heads up that my ex husband might harass him or spread a rumor. And so it was probably about 9 o'clock at night. I stopped by Andrew's house and I said, Andrew, would you fight for me? And
mm.
he looked down at me and he said, of course I would. He said, because you're worth it. And little did I know that within 24 hours, not only would Andrew be fighting for me, but he was going to be fighting for his own life. Because
Gosh.
what happened is I went home from there and I was going to sleep. I was fine. I wasn't scared. I was a little irritated about the conversation with my ex husband. But I got in bed and something just stirred in me and said, get up and lock your bedroom door. I locked my house because I was living alone, but I got up, I locked my bedroom door, and I went back to bed. And at 2:30 in the morning, I woke up to my bedroom door crashing down off the hinges. My ex-husband was intoxicated. He had a gun in his hand,
Mm,
and for the next 4 hours I was assaulted. Following the
goodness.
assault, he told me that as punishment for ruining his life, he was going to kidnap me, and I was going to have to watch as he murdered the man I had been dating. And so that kind of began the progression of a very long, it started, broke into my home at 2:30, and it was probably maybe 7 o'clock in the morning by the time all the events had unfolded. And when he kidnapped me and he took me to Andrew's house, we got to Andrew's house and my ex-husband looked over at me. He reached into the back seat of the vehicle. He got a gun. He got the bullets. And he said, now you go do whatever you need to do. And he left the keys in the ignition of the vehicle.
I can't even imagine what went through your mind in that space. Oh my goodness.
It felt like a bad dream that I was just going to wake
Mm,
up from, but I
mhm,
wasn't waking up. And there was so much adrenaline rushing through me because I was like, okay, what do I do? So I jumped into the driver's seat and I think I hit every curb. I'm just driving as fast as I
mm.
can because I was going to go get some help. And as I was backing out of the driveway, I heard 3 gunshots and I knew there was no way Andrew was going to survive this. So I later found out I only drove a block and a half, but I think
Mhm.
I actually drove in a circle and it was just like I was on such high adrenaline. And so I ran into the front of a supercenter, and by now my face is unrecognizable. I just screamed. I said, somebody call 911. And everybody, the cashiers just looked at me in horror, and it felt like it was minutes. I'm sure it wasn't, but it didn't feel like anybody was calling 911. And so
Mhm.
I looked down in my hand, and in my hand I had a cell phone that was not mine. So I can only assume I got it from the vehicle I came from. And I called 911 and I just said, "Get the police to this house." I said, "Tell them to be careful because it's not going to end well." I think once I made the call, I then collapsed because I knew, okay, now I know I'm safe. He can't get me. I'm in a safe place. And I was ushered to the stock room where I then waited for the police and an ambulance to come and get me.
Oh.
When the policeman came and got me and was escorting me out, he said, "Ma'am, we've got an ambulance waiting for you."
Mm.
What I thought was the worst it could be then got even worse. The policeman was walking me to the ambulance, and I said, "I need to get my cell phone out of that vehicle because I want to
Mm.
call my family so they don't
Mhm.
see this on the news. I want them to hear it from me." And when I opened the passenger door of the vehicle I had driven there, my ex-husband was sitting behind the steering wheel and he had a gun pointed at me because I guess he had walked that block.
Mm.
In that moment, I knew I was going to die. And I screamed, dropped to the ground, and I had a human shield of police officers around me very quickly.
Mhm.
And from that point on, my ex husband was apprehended and I was taken to a hospital. I would later learn that Andrew had actually been shot 10 times.
Mm.
And the way I learned that is we were taken to two different hospitals. He was under an assumed name because it was a crime scene. And his adult son, he has 3 adult children. I had only met one of them, and so his adult son called my cell phone number, and my adult daughter answered the phone. And he said, "You know what? We're sorry about what happened to our parents, but we just think they need to go their separate ways." And
Gosh.
so this is the news I'm getting in the emergency room, and
Mhm.
my heart was I was more upset about Andrew and I and what had happened in that we were going separate ways, and I had no way to contact him because I didn't know what name he was under. I didn't know what hospital he was in. I would actually not hear from him for it was like between 5 and 6 weeks. And that was probably the harder thing for me because I just felt like God had dangled a carrot in front of me that
Mm.
here you finally are happy again, and now it's just like taken away. So when I left the hospital, I went to stay at my mom and dad's house just for a couple of nights, but I knew it wouldn't be long term. And I had an aunt and uncle who had a beautiful home in the south part of our town. And they said, "Kim, we want to gift you with our home for the summer." They were going to Canada for the summer. And they said, "Just make it yours so you feel
Mm.
safe." And when they gave me a tour of their home, I opened the sliding patio door and there was this beautiful big pergola. And it had big, grand rafters and two big
Mm.
swings and a cement floor. And something just, I knew inside me that this was going to become a very holy ground of where my healing was going to begin. It was like when the Bible talks about Moses taking off his sandals when he saw the burning bush because it
Mm.
was holy ground. I just knew that this was going to be a holy ground where I was going to bring my pain to Jesus. That's what I did. I would go out on this patio and I'd wrap myself in a big green blanket. And the first probably week, I just laid prostrate.
Mm.
I
I get that
I
word mixed up too. Every time I'm like, that's not
yeah,
what I meant.
my husband reminds me.
Of course.
Uh,
Mine usually does too.
but I would lay prostrate on the ground and I would just weep and I would
Mm.
weep and I would weep. I didn't know my body could weep that much.
Mm.
And I remember the first prayer that I prayed and I said, "God, I don't have words to pray." I said, "I'm so broken and I'm so empty." And I knew that there had been a scripture in Zephaniah that talks about God rejoices over us with singing. And I prayed and I said, "Lord, I'm asking you to breathe life back into my body and sing over me because I have
Mm.
no words. I
Oh,
have no words to pray."
yeah.
And little by little, I would put praise and worship music on, and I let those become my prayers. And
Yeah.
I would bring my honest emotions to the Lord and everything from fear and anger and frustration. And He just met them with open arms.
Mm.
It was just like I never got reproved for having all these emotions and questions and doubts. It
Mm.
was God met me where I was at.
Yeah. I want to visit a part in your book that was so intimate, so beautiful, and out of the ordinary. It's where you start your book and how you end your book. It's based on the Ecclesiastes 3, verses 1 through 4 passage. There is a season for everything. But you tell the story about removing that green blanket and learning to dance with the creator of the universe. Take us there a little bit, Kimberly, because
Yeah.
in such an incredibly dark space where every question anyone has ever asked about the goodness of God or the presence of God or the sovereignty of God probably came in waves for you.
As I was sitting out at the pergola, I was reading through some of my old journals. And it was like 4 years earlier that I had been writing, telling the Lord, "Hey, teach me to trust you." And I wrote that at the time. I felt like his response was, "I'm the Lord of the dance." That was a scripture that kept coming up. And when I was at the pergola, first of all, it's normal when something hard happens that you want to try and control everything. And
Sure.
I can be a control freak. And so I began telling the Lord what he should do, when he should do it, how he should do it. And then I was like, "Oh, but Lord, I trust you."
At the end, right?
Right. That's right. And then I was telling my friends, this is how you need to pray, when you need to pray, get me on every
Mm.
prayer chain. And but I'm trusting God. And I
Mhm.
finally got really honest with myself and with the Lord. And I told the Lord, I said, "God, I'm scared to trust you. What if you
Mm.
don't give me what I want?" I said, "I don't think I want to trust you, my feelings."
Yeah.
And I was praying and I said, "Lord, as a sign of surrender, I said, I'm going to declare I will trust you regardless of what happens." And I said, and as a sign of surrender, I heard a song come on my playlist and it was called "Dance with Me, O Lover of My Soul."
Mm.
And I put myself in this waltz position and I closed my eyes and I imagined myself being held in the arms of the Lord. And I began to waltz to this song called "Dance with Me, O Lover of My Soul." And at the end, I would bow and curtsy
Mm.
just in reverence to the Lord. It was a sacrifice of praise on my part. And I was saying, regardless of what I'm feeling, I'm going to choose to trust you, Lord. And I like to say a sacrifice of praise is when you raise your hands when your heart is heavy. It's saying,
Mm.
"God, I'm going to trust you when my world is falling apart." And so I would do this dance and I would literally just envision Jesus holding me closely. And that's when I talk in my book about there's a time to dance. There is a season for grieving. I absolutely walked through lots of grieving. There's seasons of healing, there's seasons of forgiving, there's lots of seasons, but there's also a time to dance. And my
Yes.
time to dance
So
began with
beautiful.
surrendering and saying, "God, I'm going to trust you, even though I'm scared to trust you." And that played out.
I love the honesty in that of being able to say, Lord, I don't trust you,
Mhm.
but I'm going to choose to trust you. I want to talk with you a little bit about the healing and therapeutic process, especially your background as a therapist. I know came into significant play in your own
Mhm.
healing journey, but I want to visit for a few moments with Naomi. I had asked you about a biblical story or person who grounds you in grace.
Yes,
And you went to Naomi,
I
woman
did.
who talk about needing to control, renamed herself bitter after losing her
Mhm.
husband and two sons in Moab.
That's
So
right.
take us on a journey with Naomi. Why is she that place you go for grounding and grace? And what does her story
Yeah.
teach us?
I think that when I think about Naomi, of course, Naomi and her husband lived in Bethlehem with their 2
Mhm.
sons, and they left to go to Moab because there was, like, famine and lack, and so they go and they raise their sons get married, but during the course of a time, Naomi's husband dies and both of her sons die. And so she takes one of her daughter-in-laws back to Bethlehem, and she's greeted by these women that are excited to see her. And they say, Naomi. And
Mm.
Naomi makes a comment in that moment, and she says, do not call me Naomi anymore, because God brought me out plentiful, but God has afflicted me. So she begins to blame God. God has afflicted me, and he has brought me back empty. And from now on, my name will be bitter.
Mm.
Call me Mara. I like that story for several reasons because one, it reminded me that we have a choice in, are we going to let our circumstances name us?
Mm.
Life is not fair and we all go through really hard things. But I knew that going through my journey, I didn't want my name to be bitter, angry,
Mm.
unforgiving, resentful. I didn't want that to be my story. Because in the Bible, when God changed names, he changed it
Yeah.
to the promise and to the future. And I wanted my name to be healed and whole and joyful.
Mhm.
Now, the story of Naomi, the beautiful thing is that she made those declarations in her grief. And sometimes we say things in our grief and we're angry, but when we look at the lineage of Naomi, God actually brought beautiful things from her life. She
Yeah.
was in the indirect lineage of Jesus.
Mhm.
And so it's more a not a condemnation of Naomi because she was so angry and bitter, but it was she was that in her grief. And for me, that was a reminder of okay, what do I want to call myself? What do I want my name tag to read? And I
Mm.
wanted my name tag to be whole and
Mm.
joyful and forgiving and loving and life ahead.
I love that image of the name tag. I know there's someone listening who needs to hear that too. So let's dig into that a little bit more to move toward a name tag that is
Mhm.
whole and healed and loving. What does that healing process look like? And what are some of the parts? I don't want to say steps because that
Sure.
implies that it's linear or somehow one step leads to another. And we both know grief is not like that. But
Right.
talk to us about the healing process and what
Yeah.
that might look like for someone where grace is impossibly hard to come by.
I love that you indicate that grief is not linear because grief is
Mhm.
messy and it's not cookie
Mm.
cutter. What
Yeah.
it looks like for one person may not look what it does for another, and there is no timeline on grief. The beginning is you just do the next right step. And
Mm.
in walking in a healing, we have to be able to grieve our losses. I had to grieve my past, my present, at the time, my future, the way I wanted it. We have to
Mm.
name those losses rather than just stuff them. Don't think about them, put them in the past. It's honoring those because grief is very holy
Yeah.
and walking through grief and allowing yourself to express that. Some of the things in the very beginning is very practical because when hard things happen, it's human nature. We want to pull away, we want to isolate, we want to stay in bed. And
Mm.
so, some of the practical things are making sure I'm taking care of my body. It's giving myself nutrition, it's giving myself rest, it's getting sunlight,
Mm.
it's putting community around me to help me heal. And that doesn't mean I go to every function at church and I'm
Yeah.
out all the time. The very first phone call that I made was to my pastor. After I actually got home, I called my pastor and then I called a Christian therapist because I knew that I wanted somebody to walk me, just walk beside me as I'm walking this journey. Nobody could take it from me. But sometimes having friends, they would come around and it was the friends that would just sit with me and let me cry.
Mm.
They weren't trying to slap a Bible verse on me. They weren't
Mm.
trying to
Yeah.
say, at least you lived, at least be happy.
Yeah.
And so, community in a healthy, protected way is so important in healing. I would do things like journaling, which was creating a sacred place for my emotions without judgment, because sometimes I didn't even know how I felt. And
Mm.
doing things like journaling would begin to open that up. Prayer was a very important part where I could just go and tell the Lord, I'm mad at you. It's
Yeah.
like, why didn't you stop this? And it's being honest with our emotions because that's what David did in the Bible. David
Mhm.
would pray, and if you when you're reading the Psalms, in the beginning, many times he will say, "God, I feel like you've abandoned me. My prayers are going up to the ceiling and coming back down. My bones are aching. I have no
Mhm.
appetite." And I'll tell you, as a licensed mental health therapist, I would diagnose David with major depressive disorder. He had depression.
Mm.
And so there's a part of he would say, "This is what I feel." But then he would end a psalm with, "But this is what I know, but you are holy. But Lord, you are mighty. You do rescue." And so there's a part of not denying what I feel, but not letting my feelings be the dictators. A couple of the other things is walking through music was very healing. Watch what you
Mm.
put into your mind, what you're feeding yourself with. I would put praise and worship music on, and I let those become my prayers, and they would
Mhm.
edify my spirit.
Yeah.
I did use gratitude. And then there were things like walking through forgiveness and looking at those things, not just saying, "Hey, I forgive," but really naming what are those things I have to forgive.
Mm. And even people, you had to
Mm,
name the people that you had to forgive. And being a
did.
show about grace, which is largely about pardon and forgiveness in the form of
Mm,
God's welcome to us and then ours to others. Let's go there for a minute because
uh,
you had lots of incredible chapters, but there was one in particular about forgiveness. When I turned the page and saw that was the chapter, I made an assumption that the subject of your forgiveness would be
mhm.
your ex husband, but that's not what that chapter was about.
Now, my ex-husband was one of the people I had to
Of
forgive,
course.
but the
Hmm.
hardest person for me to forgive was myself. I had put expectations on myself and I had believed things going all the way back to my divorce. I told myself I was a failure as a mom because now my kids were from a broken home. I told
Yeah.
myself I was a failure as a wife because if I was enough, my husband wouldn't have wanted other women. I said I was a failure as a marriage therapist because here I'm working with families and my own is falling apart. And then I told myself I had failed God because I told
Mm-hmm.
God I was going to be married till death do us part. And now those things that I told myself were not true things, but they were judgments I put on myself.
Yeah.
God, I wasn't a failure to God. God wasn't mad at me. But I also had to forgive God. And it's not that God needed my forgiveness. God doesn't need to be forgiven.
Mm.
I needed to release God from the expectations I had put on him. God, you didn't show up how I wanted, when I wanted, where I wanted. You didn't do what I wanted you to do. And so I had to release those expectations. And then
Mm.
I'd forgive well meaning Christian friends that had told me through the years, "Stay in your marriage, believe God for your
Mm-hmm.
marriage." Yes, God restores. I see restored marriages all the time. But you've got to have two people that are willing to work at things. And God doesn't want you in a relationship where there is betrayal and there's emotional abuse. And God doesn't want you in that. And
Mm-hmm.
so one of the hardest people I had to forgive was the woman that had an affair with my ex husband. And
Yeah.
I was in church one day and I felt the stirring inside of me. And the pastor said they were getting ready to repaint the walls. And he
Mm-hmm.
said, "We're handing out Sharpie markers and we want you to write the initials of people on the wall that need the Lord, that are far from the Lord." And I felt the Lord nudge me and say, "Write her name on the wall."
Oh
And
my
I honestly,
goodness.
I got
I bet there was a
angry.
little bit of arguing going on in that little soul of the seat or seat of the soul right there.
I was like, "Get thee behind me, Satan." Uh,
Exactly.
this conversation was going on very quickly, but I said, "Absolutely not. No
Yeah.
way." And it's like, "God, did you not see what she did to me?
Yeah.
Did you not see?" And I know she only took what was willingly offered, but I was angry at her. And it was like, "God, I didn't do anything. It wasn't fair." And I heard the Lord say again, "I want you to write her name on the wall."
Mm.
And I'm arguing with the Lord, and I felt him ask me, "Why were you willing to forgive your husband?" Because my husband and I weren't divorced. We were going through it because why were you willing to forgive him and not her? And I said, "Because I love him."
Oh.
And I felt the Lord say, "And I love her." And so there's a part in my book that says if the walls of the church could talk, they would tell the story of two women that Jesus loved equally, me and her. And so I had to really, and I did. I got up, I wrote her initials on the wall very high, as high as I could. It was that first step. And it was, God, I'm not ready to forgive, but I want to be willing because right now I'm not even willing. And so I
Mm,
had to walk through that process of how do I forgive somebody that I don't even want to forgive? Because they had said when they painted the walls, people were going to be praying and stretching their hands towards the walls and praying for people at different times. And I thought, Lord, I don't want to pray for her, but I don't want anyone else to either.
mm,
I don't want her
mhm,
to accept the Lord. I
mhm,
don't want her to go to heaven. I want her to burn in hell. I was like, Lord, don't ask this of me.
yeah,
And God, in His goodness, it's like He didn't clobber me over the head, but again, He wooed me with it. It's just this wooing. And it was like, okay, Lord, I will obey, even though I don't feel like it.
mm,
And so that was the beginning of a healing and forgiveness. I didn't forgive her that day. Forgiveness is a ongoing process. It's not a one-time decision. But when I made the decision, I am going to choose to forgive. It's not a feeling. I'm going to choose to forgive. So today I'm going to forgive again. And I kept doing that and kept doing that. And all of a sudden, it was like one day I woke up and I'm like, it's been a long time since I've felt that
mm.
need to remind myself to forgive.
That's the muscle memory we build up in those time after time of
That's right.
choosing to release. What was at stake for you, Kimberly, if
Mhm.
you had stuck to your initial response, which
Yeah.
was to say, no way?
I think what's at stake, and this is something I actually talk when I'm in therapy with my clients, is that
Mm,
unforgiveness and anger is like an umbilical cord between you and the other person that's hurt you or offended you or that situation.
mm,
And with a baby, an umbilical cord is meant to bring life and nutrition. But when I stay angry and when I walk in unforgiveness, my brain has to remember and go over the details over and over again so I don't forget why I'm angry. And so that umbilical cord connects me to that event. And instead of giving me life and nutrition, it sucks the life out
mm,
of me. And that's that dried and broken spirit that the Bible talks about. I couldn't move forward in my life without actually walking in forgiveness. And I go back and say forgiveness is a choice. The day I was assaulted,
yeah.
in between, I had been assaulted for 4 hours. The intoxication was wearing off my husband. And he looked down at me and he said, "Tell me the truth. I've gone too far. You could never forgive me." And I knew that I didn't know how I was going to heal, but I knew that I didn't want to be connected to him for the
Mm,
rest of my life with anger and bitterness. And so I
mhm.
looked at him and I called out his name and I said, "Yes, you've gone too far. There's no going back." I said, "But I want you to know that I will forgive you." And I was making a declaration over myself. And it took time but those were actually the last words I ever spoke to my ex-husband was the words I said, "I will forgive you."
Oh my goodness. That's Jesus from the cross, right? Where he looks down and says, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. And to some degree, he had sense enough to realize I've gone too far, but
Yeah,
that is the ultimate
yeah.
proclamation of grace.
You know,
Forgive them.
we talk about because it's not fair. We have been hurt, but I think of Jesus, like you mentioned, hanging on the cross. He could have said, "Father," first of all, he said, "Father, why have you forsaken and abandoned
Yeah.
me?" Jesus felt
Hmm.
abandoned too.
Yeah.
But he said, "Forgive them because they know not what they do." He could have said, "It's not fair. I didn't do anything. Look, Father,
Mm-hmm.
didn't you see what they did?" But instead, he said, "Father,
Mm.
forgive
Oh,
them."
yeah.
And Jesus never asks us to do something that he hasn't modeled first because
That's
he
right.
wouldn't ask us to forgive if he hadn't forgiven.
That's right.
And so, again, that's that continual. I think that's just, you can't really be totally healed if you're not walking in forgiveness.
One of my favorite things you wrote is that worship is God's secret weapon of mass destruction.
That's
And I
right.
know there were a number of songs that you played on repeat that were part
Mhm.
of your healing process and journey. What was one of the favorites for someone who's listening right now who is struggling with grace that's so hard to come by? It costs too much, it feels impossible.
They're all my favorites, and so I put them
Mm.
all in my book on a playlist for people. They can borrow my playlist. But one of the ones that stands out to me immediately is an old song by the Imperials.
Oh,
And
goodness, that goes back a
I
few
it
years.
goes back to the 1980s. It's a song called Pieces. And it says, "Pieces, God's picking up the pieces of my life. All the
Mm.
broken pieces that are destroyed and strewn all over the place, he can put them back together again." And that's one of the things that, when Andrew and I first met, it's like our story was like a Hallmark love story, and I felt like Princess Cinderella.
Y
But then all of a sudden, it was Humpty Dumpty. And I
Mm.
felt like I fell
Mhm.
off the wall, and all the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put me back together again. But
Mm.
then I ran to the King of Kings,
Mm.
and the King of
Yeah.
Kings picked up the pieces. And when God picks up the pieces, he restores better than it ever was to begin with. There's other songs on there. I think Casting Crowns, the group, was probably one of my favorite groups because I
Mm.
felt like they wrote every song just for me. And
Yeah.
then, of course, the one Dance With Me, O Lover of My Soul by Paul Wilbur, the one where I would close my eyes. And I still, to this day, it's been 8 years. I still,
Mm.
to this day, sometimes when my husband is gone, because by the way, Andrew did survive and he's now my husband.
Spoiler alert,
Spoiler alert,
yes.
he is my
Mhm.
husband now.
Mm.
Sometimes when he's out running errands and I know he's not going to come in and watch and make fun of me, I will go in my bathroom and I will put on this song and I will close
Mm.
my eyes and it's, Lord, I just want to feel close. I just want to feel your arms around me. And I will put on the Dance With Me song.
I love that. As you were sharing that, I just had this image of you dancing with the Lord
Mm.
and Andrew coming home and asking the Lord, "May I cut in, please?"
Yeah. Yeah.
Except with this in cut, it's not to replace God,
No, no.
but that He has become for you
Yeah.
an extension of God's love for you.
Absolutely.
Oh,
The
I
day of
love that.
my wedding, and when you mentioned this earlier at the end of my book, I had already moved out of my uncle and aunt's home. I wake up and I'm thinking, do I have all the details of the wedding photographer? I knew I had an appointment to keep. I texted my aunt and uncle and I said, keep the windows shut. Don't look outside. Don't call the police. If you hear a noise, it's just me. But I went back. I kind of went around the side of the house, put on the music, and prayed, and I asked the Lord, I said, sometimes when we go through hard things, we really press into the Lord, but then life gets going good, and all of a sudden is
Mm.
that urgency leaves. And
Yeah.
my prayer that day is, Lord, help me to always keep you as my first love and not let anything come in that place. So I did my dance to Dance With Me, O Lover of My Soul. And I started my wedding day with a dance with an audience of one, with heaven being the witness. And I ended it in the arms of my husband, Andrew Haar,
Mm.
and it was our wedding day dance.
Oh, that is just beyond beautiful. That is the definition of beauty from ashes.
Mm,
And friend who's listening right now, Kim has for certain a deeply unique story. So the pages of your story sound and look very different from hers, but hear this from both of us, that the God who swept her up in his embrace
mhm,
in that pergola is the same God who longs and desires to sweep you up with whatever is feeling
mhm.
incredibly hard for you in this space and in this moment. Kimberly, you shared in your book that God whispered in your ear as he was ushering you into yet another season. First, would you share with us what God whispered to you? And then, what would you whisper in the ear of someone who's listening right now who feels that grace is impossibly hard to come by? It costs too much. It's just beyond me.
What I felt the Lord whispering to me was just that reminder of put my feet on top of His and watch what He can do.
Mm.
It's not having to figure things out, but it's just like that childhood innocence of just put your feet on mine. But the person that feels like there's not enough grace, there's a part of the Bible talks about that God is close to the brokenhearted. And he
Mm.
says, draw near to me and I'll draw near to you. He promises that when we seek him, we will find him. And just being in the presence of the Lord, healing begins there. And so it's not about how quickly I can heal and go through something. It's how can I take that first step, just saying, I want to heal, bring that to the Lord and say, Lord, here I am. I'm ready. And take it that just the next right step and watch what God can do because his feet are big enough for all of us. God doesn't have any favorites. He doesn't have any stepchildren. He doesn't have any foster children. We all have his love. And he says to all of us, you are my favorite.
What a beautiful place for us to land. Kimberly, thank you. Where can our listeners find you, be in touch with you? You mentioned you have a playlist, and I know you have some other freebies available. I'd love for them to find your book, Healing from Life's Deepest Hurts. Give us all the information.
All right. The best place to do is go to my website, kimberlyhaar.com. And Haar is spelled Haar. The playlist I'm talking about is in my book, and it is under the power of music. There's a code in there you can scan, and it's like you can come to the pergola with me because those were the songs I played. You can get my book on my website. You can go to Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Baker Books, my publisher. It's online at Target. So anywhere books are sold, you can find it. And then I'm on social media. You can either catch me on Instagram at kimberly.har or Facebook is Kimberly J. Haar.
Kimberly, would you be willing to close us in prayer? You included several at the end of your book that deeply impacted me.
Yes. How about the prayer of forgiveness, which is the prayer to forgive others?
That's
And that just
perfect.
says, Heavenly Father, I know you see what's in my heart, and right now I'm struggling to forgive. You say in your word that we should forgive and even pray for those who hurt us. But honestly, God, I'm struggling with this. Today, I make the choice to surrender my will and ask you to help me see the ones who hurt me in the same manner that you see them. Grant me the strength to feel compassion even when it seems impossible. Help me release the pain I've been carrying and teach me to forgive others as freely as you've forgiven me. Today, I choose to release those people who have hurt me from the wrongs that were done to me. Thank you, Lord, for continuing to heal my heart. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much for your time with us. Grace is often hard to come by, but you have given us some beautiful tools of allowing the Father to lead us in the dance so that we too can experience the kind of healing He deeply longs for us. Thank you so much, Kimberly.
Thank you, Jennifer, for having me.
Did you hear what Kimberly said as she began to unfold her trauma in the pergola at her aunt and uncle's house? She said, God, I'm scared to trust you. I think grace is often hard for us to come by because we're afraid of what it might cost us, of what God might ask of us or require of us. And if that's where you're sitting right now, if grace is hard to come by because you're struggling to trust God, then I want to go back to that beautiful image Kimberly described for us. When God whispered in her ear, put your feet on mine and let me show you the way. And friend, there's no time like the present. Whether you're driving in your car or you're folding laundry or doing dishes or wherever you're listening to this podcast episode right now, be honest with God as Kimberly was. It's okay to say out loud, God, I am scared to trust you. And then watch what He does with that kind of honesty, vulnerability, and openness. I promise you, He'll meet you there. And as Kimberly said, His feet are big enough to hold yours. As always, you can find me at jennifersakata.com, on Instagram at jennifersakata, on Facebook at jennifersakata.author, and on YouTube at Jennifer Sakata. And if you're watching from YouTube, be sure to subscribe and follow so you don't miss an episode. Until next time, live the grace life generously, friend. Grace for you, grace for them.